Holy One, you hear us when all we can hear is our heart beating and the anguish within us. Be here with us this morning. Be in these words, and we offer this time to you, God, for the healing of our people, of our community, and our land. Amen. Well, I attended an academic religious conference, probably my first and last. Maybe not for me, but I was in Atlanta, it was a few years ago, and I went to a panel I was really excited about with several well-known civil rights leaders, names you would know. And we all listened really attentively as they shared about their experiences, and then it was time for Q&A. And a young pastor, young because he's younger than me, I could tell, so he's very, very young, got up and asked his question. And he said, "Thank you for speaking. 9 days ago, a teenager in my church was shot and killed by the police who targeted him for being black. And my question is, what do I tell his mom?" And no one had an answer. I mean, they talked, they had a lot of words, but I could tell from where I was sitting that there was no answer that this young pastor was receiving. No one could tell him what to say to this mom. There is a crisis happening in our country. It has been happening for a while. Since about 1619, when the first people were brought from Africa and enslaved on this continent at Jamestown. There has never been a time in our American history before the crisis of oppression and violence. And so while some of us might feel outraged or hopeless or revolted at the condition of our country right now, if it seemed better before, if it seemed like it was working for most of us, then that experience might be a function of the privilege that was insulating us from experiencing how much of our country does not work for others. Others like Jean and Ravi, the friends that our senior minister has gone to fight for in New York City. Ravi's arrest has made it clear that ICE is targeting resistance leaders within the immigrant rights movement. And it's not just New York. Same day, Boulder, Colorado, the husband of a local leader, the leader is in sanctuary at the Unitarian Church, and her husband stopped by Safeway to get some groceries for their sons, who were 2 and 9, and ICE took him away. I don't know Jean or Ravi, and I'm moved by Michael's stories about them, but I don't know them. I mentioned that the letter from Michael is in the back. There's also a copy of a sermon he gave, and it has some great stories about Jean that help you to kind of meet this man. You may not know Jean or Ravi, but I know many of you remember when the Gavilanes family was fighting to allow Enrique to stay in this country, right? You went on a journey with the Gavilanes family. You may not know Jean or Ravi, but many of you have held vigil or have marched with me for justice for Keaton Otis, Larnell Bruce, Kendra James, Chris Kalanji. You may not know Jean or Ravi, but you might know what it means to love a child, any child. To be a parent, godparent, an aunt, an uncle, a friend. As a mother of 2 daughters, what I know is that we don't have the luxury of despair, of insulation. We are not allowed to look away, and not just because of our personal relationships, not just because, as part of your community, I have put all of you on hook for my girls, 5 years and 10 months, right? I'm counting on you to help me create a better future for them. We're on the hook not just because Michael has connected us to his friends and through them to that larger immigrant rights movement, not only for our heart for this connection, but we cannot look away because of all of this around us. This building, our sacred stories, our theological inheritance. Jesus sees the money changers oppressing the people in the synagogue, From the other Gospels, we know that especially that transaction with doves was an exploitation of the poor. And Jesus does not look away. He engages. He's furious. Your time is up, he tells them. You will stop now. And Jesus throws out this commercial enterprise, right? I like to think that at least a few of the people that he threw out were invited back, right? Less about the people and more about what they were doing. He casts them out. The Greek in that passage is the same one that's used in Mark and in Matthew when Jesus casts out demons. Same word. We could say Jesus exorcises the demons of economic oppression, and he does it not only by turning over the tables, but he makes a whip out of cords, probably ropes, from right there in the temple itself. He uses the materials around him to act. And he does it not because he is self-righteous and judgmental, hey, I'm Jesus, right? I know the right way. He does it because he loves God's house. He longs for this place that is meant to be about connecting the people to the holy. And this economic oppression is shattering that. It's making that not possible. So it is both fury and longing, I believe, that sees Jesus in that moment. And we too must exorcise the demons of racism and militarism and economic injustice, not only from our country and from our city, but from our church and from our hearts. And so we join in that revolution begun 50 years ago because the crisis in our country is over 400 years old. As Alice read, 50 years ago, Dr. King invited people to come together in this Poor People's Campaign, and they had three main things they hoped to achieve. One, to demonstrate the needs of the poor, which sounds like monolithic, but really, of course, is multiple. Demonstrate the needs of the poor, unite all races under the commonality of economic hardship, and then three, actually create a real-world solution, a $30 billion anti-poverty package, an economic bill of rights. And they practiced civil disobedience to try to get this to pass through Congress. And of course, while much was achieved, April of '68, King is murdered, and much was also left undone. So Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday, for me, does not mean that we honor a legacy of the past, but that we recommit to our longing and our labor for justice. We don't commemorate Dr. King this morning. We continue the work that he has begun because we do not have the luxury of despair. I will not let you have it. I will not let myself have it because of our children and all of the children to come. In an op-ed in the Times on Friday, Roxane Gay, who comes from Haiti, she says, "I am not going to make people feel better about the gilded idea of America that becomes more and more compromised and impoverished with each passing day of the Trump presidency. This is a painful, uncomfortable moment. Instead of trying to just get past this moment, we should sit with it, wrap ourselves in sorrow, distress, and the humiliation. We need to sit with the discomfort of a president of the United States referring to countries as shitholes during a meeting that continued with no one challenging him. No one is coming to save us," she says. "And before we can figure out how to save ourselves from this travesty, we need to sit with that too. No one is coming to save us." When I was in high school, I was taught this mythology of the civil rights movement. It was this like magical time that had happened and would never happen again. That's what I was taught. Does that ring a bell with anybody? Did you have that same sense of, right? Which, if you look at it, is such an interesting and important lie, right? Because it says that it stopped, which for all of the people who continued working, it did not. And it closes off the young idealist in me that says, but we're not done, right? My daughter comes home from kindergarten and tells me that Dr. King is about having everybody be friends, which starts, yes. And then there's so much more. That mythology is still there firmly in place. When we look at our children, our grief must turn to determination, and we must hold both our sorrow and our fury and our longing, that same zeal that Jesus felt. We cannot leave our children in the racist words of our president. We must proclaim what our faith teaches and what we know to be right. Every country on this earth is beautiful, and all people are blessed. And so the Poor People's Campaign continues right here, right now, and in churches and synagogues and mosques and community centers all across our country. The Poor People's Campaign shifts the distorted moral narrative that focuses on personal issues and property rights and looks instead at systemic injustice, like how we treat immigrants and those on the margins, the sick, and our desire for peace and harmony between nations. There's information about the campaign in your bulletin that tells you more, that introduces you to Reverend William Barber of Moral Mondays, Reverend Liz Theo Harris of the Kairos Center. And this campaign isn't only about our values, but how we live our values with our bodies. Nonviolent civil disobedience. It is not partisan. It is not about Democrat versus Republican. It is not about right versus left. It is about right versus wrong. This is spiritual practice, how we exhibit the values we claim to believe, how we allow ourselves to be uncomfortable, to make mistakes, and yet to keep going. And like Jesus, we use the tools around us. So in your bulletin, you will find a pledge card. Michael was going to present this to you, but I'm here instead. Michael will be leading the statewide campaign. Here's the pledge card. You may fill it out and put it in the plate or in a basket on the welcome table. First part of this campaign is 40 days of moral action, May 13th to June 21st. And of course, if you have been doing this for a long time, you know this campaign is not just going to solve everything, but it is our next step, one that feels risky for some of us and natural for others. And so our work continues, because this is the only response that I can imagine to the mother who is grieving her child. And it is the only answer I can give to people who come to me heavy with sorrow and fury over our country. That we do these three things: that we feel what is true, that we remember what is right, and that we act. We begin again today. Amen.